White initiates with establishing central control and maintaining equality with a solid move. Black responds with a slight inaccuracy, allowing white a marginal advantage. White advances the pawn, reinforcing central presence and keeping the dynamic balance. Black develops the knight to a solid response that maintains the game's equilibrium. White develops the knight to a standard developing move that keeps the slight advantage. Black plays a solid move, preparing to fianchetto the bishop. White develops the bishop to pinning the knight and maintaining pressure. Black fianchettos the bishop to a solid defensive setup. White develops the queen to preparing for castling and connecting the rooks. Black plays a solid move to prevent the bishop from advancing further. White advances the bishop to a solid move that maintains positional control. Black pushes the g-pawn to a slight inaccuracy that weakens the kingside. White retreats the bishop to maintaining a solid position. Black maneuvers the knight to a solid developing move. White castles queenside, a solid strategic decision. Black develops the knight to a solid move that strengthens the center. White develops the bishop to a slight inaccuracy that doesn't achieve much. Black develops the bishop to a solid defensive move. White repositions the knight to a solidizing maneuver. Black captures the knight on a slight inaccuracy that unfortunately opens the file. White recaptures with the h-pawn, a solid move that opens a file for the rook. Black plays a slight inaccuracy that doesn't contribute to development. White exchanges the bishop for the knight on a solid positional decision. Black recaptures with the bishop, a solid move maintaining the pawn structure. White advances the f-pawn to a slight inaccuracy that weakens the pawn chain. Black plays a solid move reinforcing the center. White pushes the central pawn to a solid positional move. Black develops the bishop to a solid defensive maneuver. White exchanges pawns on a slight inaccuracy that simplifies the position. Black recaptures with the f-pawn, a solid move that opens the f-file. White advances the e-pawn to a solid centralizing move. Black captures the pawn on a slight inaccuracy that loses tempo. White centralizes the queen to a solid attacking idea. Black retreats the queen to a solid defensive move. White delivers a check with the queen to a solid tactic. Black moves the king to a mistake that leads to a significant disadvantage. White pushes the f-pawn to a mistake that doesn't fully exploit the advantage. Black recaptures the pawn on a slight inaccuracy that opens lines. White places the knight on a solid attacking move. Black retreats the queen to a solid defensive stance. White advances the g-pawn to a solid move aiming for kingside expansion. Black plays a severe blunder that weakens the queenside further. White captures the pawn on a severe blunder that opens too many lines. Black activates the rook to a solid defensive maneuver. White advances the f-pawn to a solid move increasing pressure. Black captures the pawn on with the rook, a solid exchange. White recaptures with the knight, a solid move maintaining central control. Black recaptures the knight with the queen, a solid move. White moves the queen to a severe blunder that retreats the queen. Black centralizes the king to a solid defensive move. White centralizes the queen to a mistake that loses tempo. Black develops the bishop to a solid defensive outpost. White captures the pawn on a solid but uninspired move. Black plays a solid move reinforcing the pawn structure. White checks with the queen to a solid forcing move. Black tucks the bishop away to a slight inaccuracy. White centralizes the queen to a solid move maintaining pressure. Black plays a severe blunder that allows for a crushing tactical sequence. White advances the queen to a solid move continuing the attack. Black retreats the bishop to a solid defensive adjustment. White delivers a check with the queen to an excellent move exploiting weaknesses. Black moves the king to a solid retreat. White exchanges the rook on a mistake that doesn't force the win. Black moves the king to a slight inaccuracy. White captures the rook on a solid decisive exchange. Black recaptures the pawn on a solid but futile effort. White moves the rook to a mistake that allows black some breathing room. Black develops the bishop to a slight inaccuracy. White centralizes the queen to a solid move maintaining the advantage. Black plays a severe blunder that leaves the king exposed. White checks with the queen to an excellent move forcing the win. Black moves the king to a slight inaccuracy. White moves the queen to a severe blunder that misses the quickest mate. Black develops the bishop to a solid defensive move. White captures the bishop on a solid move. Black moves the rook to a solid defensive move. White centralizes the queen to a solidizing move. Black moves the king to a severe blunder that loses the game instantly. White moves the queen to a solid continuation of the attack. Black plays a solid pawn push. White places the rook on a solid finalizing move.